Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Achieving Digital Transformation and Supporting Your Workforce in Times of Uncertainty. Today's event is produced in partnership with Veeam. Thank you so much for joining us on the webinar. We've got a great event lined up for you today and a really timely topic. I know many of you out there are struggling with supporting your workforce, especially with everyone working from home, and we have threats of ransomware and malicious attacks just right and left. So this is a hot topic, and we've got some just really expert advice on the event. Before I introduce you to today's expert presenters, just a few things that you should know about the webinar. First off, my name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as your moderator on the event. We want this to be an educational event, and as such, we encourage you to use the questions box. It's there in the left-hand side of your audience console. I can see that many of you have already discovered it. I welcome all the hello and good morning messages from across the United States and around the world, but we also want your technical questions on this topic. We want to help solve your technology challenges on this event. So keep those questions coming. Every time we have Veeam on, we have a lot of great questions, and I'm sure that this event will be no different. We also have a number of resources there, and you can find those in the handouts tab. We've got the slide deck from today's presentation in PDF that you can download, as well as a number of other resources. I'm not going to list them all out. I can see that some of them are the top IT considerations for agencies moving to remote work, the right tools and technology for governments and employees at public sector institutions. There's a resource there on that. Best practices for protecting data in state and local governments, and also backup and replication as a ransomware defense strategy for schools. So excellent resources. Make sure that you download those before you leave today's event. So a lot of excellent resources. And then finally, some of you may have heard we have an Amazon $500 gift card we'll be awarding at the end of today's presentation to one lucky winner on the live event. If you're watching this on demand, of course, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. And with that, I'm excited to introduce you to today's presenters. Welcome Mr. Jeff Reichard, Senior Director for Enterprise Strategy at Veeam, and Mr. Rick Vanover, Director of Technical Product Marketing, also at Veeam. Jeff and Rick, it's great to have you on. With that, I'll first hand it off to you. Take it away, Rick.
Oh, hey, well, just like that, I got a promotion. Now I'm Senior Director. I've done a lot here with you, David, and Senior Director of Product Strategy, joined by my peer, Jeff. How you doing today, Jeff?
I'm doing great, Rick. How about you?
Hey, I'm doing well. And, actually, I think I need to be on the other side of this and throw my name in for that $500 Amazon gift card. But instead, we're going to focus on some really specific, relevant topics here today. So I got some really good perspective I'm going to come in with here in a moment. But Jeff, why don't you get us started on this great journey?
That sounds good. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jeff Reichard. I work in the office of the CTO at Veeam, along with Rick. And on the product strategy team, I have the good luck to spend most of my time talking with two groups of people. I talk with industry analysts about what they're hearing about what's going on in the data management field. But most important, I talk with customers, in particular, our public sector customers and our education customers. So what we're going to start out with today is a quick overview of what we and analysts are hearing from you about what you're dealing with this year and going into 2021, especially around things like budgets and pandemic response. And then we're going to look at two big technical areas that we hear again and again are of special concern to our customers, given what we're all living through right now. So when we talk about the trends that we're dealing with, obviously pandemic response is number one on that list. Our state and local customers are dealing with the public health ramifications of helping their communities through it. All of our education customers are trying to navigate how they succeed at remote education. Along with that, our customers are telling us that budgets are a significant issue. Now we'll dig into that a little bit more on the next slide, but we know that all of you on the call are dealing with budgets, especially affected by pandemics, and that for the foreseeable future, all of us are going to be doing more with less. And believe it or not, if you talk with analysts like Gartner about this, they peg North America at being pretty far ahead of the curve in terms of return to 2019 spending levels. The latest analysis is that we're going to get back around mid-2022, but some geographies could be as late as 2024 before they get back to the kind of spending levels that we saw last year. Of course, even though we're doing more with less, the requirements for security and governance haven't gone anywhere. Privacy and data governance mandates are going up everywhere across the United States and in fact worldwide. And the security threats that our state and local and education customers are facing are only increasing as time goes on. So we all have to keep dealing with that as well. And the fourth thing that we consistently hear from customers is that the folks who were furthest along in switching to digital citizen services, in switching to digital education, have weathered the pandemic and the changes in how we work and how we educate the best. And a lot of our customers are still driving hard with that kind of initiative, even with the restraints and constraints that we're all dealing with right now. So let's dig a little bit more into budget and look at what we'll be facing on the budget front, probably for the next couple of years. This is a New York Times story from this summer. Basically, the net is that there's a large number of folks who've had to be let go, so we're doing more with less people as well. And plans to upgrade critical infrastructure have also been significantly scaled back. If you add up the numbers for the budget shortfalls through this year and the next couple of years, we're looking at basically $500 billion of likely budget shortfall to state and local governments through 2022. To put that in perspective, if you look at the comparisons here, this is probably a more significant budget situation that state and local customers are dealing with now than any of us have had to deal with in our entire working lives. So it's a very significant hump that we've got to get over. And of course, one of the things that's helping us to get through the issues that we're having with working remotely is the transition to all the different technologies that let us succeed at doing that. One of the big ones in that space is Office 365, both the applications and Exchange Online and Teams. As I think a lot of us have seen, the adoption of that kind of tech has really enhanced, but with the adoption of Office 365 growing, there are some concerns that we've got to have about that. Quantifying what the adoption growth looks like. Satya Nadella said back in April, after we were only a couple of months into the pandemic, that we've seen 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months. Office 365 growth and Microsoft Teams growth have really borne that out. We are at over 200 million active monthly users. There was a period in the spring of this year that the active users of Teams doubled in the course of 1 week. And of course, all of us are benefiting from that. This is what's letting us work remotely. This is what's letting us keep sharing documents, keep interacting with our team, keep providing citizen services. So there's a lot of good things about that. It's letting us stay productive even in quarantine. But the risks that go along with remote work are also something that we have to be conscious of. First, of course, we have a lot of folks that may be doing their daily work from devices that are not part of the enterprise IT shop. They may not have the latest security patches on them. They may not even be running supported operating systems anymore if folks are working on personal devices from home. The way that they're getting to the enterprise environment and interacting with citizens and interacting with students is through their home router. And I don't know if you all saw, but this spring there were several stories. Basically, first, for one particular popular vendor, they had over 79 router models with unpatched firmware bugs on them that compromised remote administration. I actually had to go out and get a new router when that came out because it was unpatched for a while. And there have been a couple of stories about unpatched security flaws in many home routers. So it's a real issue that didn't necessarily come into play when we were all working inside the walls of the enterprise. And to compound that, we have a lot of folks that may be on our teams who perhaps don't have good home Wi-Fi connections and they're relying on public Wi-Fi, or students being educated with remote learning who have to use public Wi-Fi with all the security threats that go along with that. Why does this matter around Office 365 specifically? It matters because Microsoft Office, when you look at the kinds of attacks that frequently get through and cause ransomware, is a leading vector for applications that are attacked. If you look at specific type of apps that are attacked, Microsoft Office is way out in front, according to this Kaspersky Lab survey, as being a vector for ransomware and malware to get into your environment. There are others, of course, browsers, the Android operating system, Java defects, things like that. But the kinds of apps, the exact same apps that are being served out through Office 365 are a leading attack vector for bad stuff getting into your environment. Let's dig deeper into Office 365 data protection. So we just heard adoption is increasing dramatically. On the bad side, the Microsoft 365 applications are a leading vector for malware to get in the environment, malware that can destroy data. Microsoft does protect the data that is sitting in your OneDrive folder or in Exchange Online or SharePoint Online or Teams. But if you look at the default retention periods, the default protection that goes with those, for inbox data, Office 365, after 2 years, it's moved to archive. It's not copied. There's still only one copy of it. It's an archive. Deleted items in the recycle bin, default retention period is 30 days. That can be extended, but even on extension, it can only be extended up to typically a maximum of 3 months, and that requires administrative work that often doesn't get done. The same kind of 1 month to 3 month retention stage is there as well for SharePoint and OneDrive for Business files. And if an employee leaves the company, then the default is that after 30 days, the data associated with that account is permanently deleted. None of this is to say that Microsoft is doing a bad job. Microsoft security and availability for this service are amazing. Generally speaking, they provide a lot better uptime and resiliency than any of us did ourselves when we were running Exchange in-house. And there's a lot of really great reasons for Office 365 adoption. But it's important to understand what you're getting when you go with the service. And Microsoft is very clear about what the default retentions and protections for the data that they protect are. It's more important to notice that because when most of us were doing this in-house, when we ran our own file shares for the sorts of things that we have in OneDrive now, or when we were running our own Exchange servers or SharePoint servers, we had typically worked and figured out what the retention that the business needed was and put that in place with the data protection solution that we had in place. The good news is with Veeam, you can turn around and take exactly the same kind of thoughtful, requirements-based protections that you might have had when your Exchange, when your file shares, when your SharePoint was on site, and put that directly into your Office 365 environment and protect things the same way. You can decide exactly how long you need to keep email. You can be very granular about different policies for different groups of users if you want. Same thing for deleted items, SharePoint Online sites, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of capabilities that you get backing up. And Veeam isn't the only solution for this. We think we're the best. We are the leading in the industry. But it's important to be aware that the transition to remote work, when you've modernized to software as a service in Office 365, you also need to think about taking some kind of enterprise data protection along with you to make sure that you meet the requirements the same way you did when that stuff was on-prem. Unfortunately, that message can at times be lost on folks when they do this migration. These statistics are from Veeam's Data Protection Survey last September, 2,152 respondents. When we talked with customers about what they were doing to back up their Microsoft 365, their Office 365 data, 19% said they were relying on Microsoft's native tools for backup. By the way, Microsoft does not do native backups to a point in time for Office 365, or they say we don't back it up, we rely on the native resiliency. So 76% of the folks that we surveyed at that time did not have an answer in place to guarantee that if they needed to restore a given set of mailboxes or user files to some point in time, which is a very, very common situation, if you're dealing with litigation, if you're dealing with audits or regulatory compliance issues, they didn't have a solution in place that would let them get that. If they needed to recover mail from someone who'd left the organization and been gone more than 30 days, they didn't have a solution in place to do that. It becomes a little bit more concerning when we turn around and ask, okay, you may not have backup, but have you ever actually lost data in a cloud service? Is this something that really happens to you? And the answer overwhelmingly is yes. 37% user error or accidental deletion, and there have actually been some fairly significant cases that have been in the news lately about that kind of data loss in software as a service applications. Also, of course, security threats, either from outsiders or from insiders, or just a matter of retention policies, assuming that the way we kept deleted items, the way that we kept archived mail, whatever, is the same once I move it up on premises, even though that may not be the stated policies that are in place when you move to that software as a service. So significant number of folks, when asked, have you lost data in the cloud? The answer is yes, and the causes are kind of what you would expect. So to net this out, when we talk about reasons why backup for Microsoft 365 is a good thing, the first is accidental deletion, like we saw on the last slide. Folks delete things that they don't intend to delete, and they need to get that data back. The next, of course, is retention policy confusion and gaps, exactly as we just saw too. I didn't know that when a user left the organization, their data would automatically be lost after 30 days. And of course, I needed to get it back for whatever reason after that timeline. Internal security threats, this has also been in the news. Actually, a young man went to prison in the UK for deleting as many backups and production servers off of his former employer's cloud environment on the way out the door in the UK for this a couple of months ago. It is actually something that happens and that enterprises and organizations need to guard against. We've all read about ransomware. Now, we've been pretty fortunate. Ransomware so far has been not as effective at penetrating Microsoft and Office 365 as it is with on-premises servers and sets of data. But at our Veeam conference this past June, we actually demonstrated the ransomware-like encryption using a script of mapped OneDrive folders. My colleague Corinne Bassett did that, and then the restoring of that data using Veeam Backup for Office 365. So it is absolutely something that applies. It applies perhaps more to OneDrive than Exchange Online, but it's definitely a threat to be concerned about. Legal and compliance requirements is super high on this list. If I need to restore the email and all files for 20 people who were senior people in my organization, and 3 of them have left since the date that I need to restore that information to, without a backup, I'm not going to be able to meet that. I'm not going to be able to do what I need to be compliant or to meet that discovery request. And then, of course, there's also the consideration that if I have data that I've kept on premises, which overwhelmingly is the case for our state and local customers, there are things that do move to the cloud, there are things that haven't yet or never will, then it would be helpful to have a tool that lets me manage both my on-premises Exchange, file, SharePoint type resources and my cloud-based resources using the same kinds of policies, the same kinds of admin console, so that I can drive efficiencies and make sure that nothing's falling between the cracks. So when we talk with folks about this, this tends to resonate. It makes sense when we talk about the Office 365 environment. To get specific about what that looks like, again, with Veeam Backup for Office 365, and this is talking about V4, V5 will actually be released later this week, and I'll talk briefly about what's going to be in that, but Veeam Backup for Office 365 V4, which is out now, you can use the exact same tool to protect Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive online as you use to protect those resources on premises. You can also take advantage of low-cost object storage, either in the cloud or on premises. So you can drive real efficiencies, retain data for longer, use resources either in Azure Blob Storage, either in the Microsoft Cloud environment, in other clouds, or local storage, either object or otherwise, on premises. And of course, because Veeam has a great pedigree, a lot of maturity in this area, we give a lot of ways to restore that data, either for large scale restores to bring a whole environment back up, or to be responsive to a few items being deleted, or to things like audits or e-discovery requests where you might want to restore data from just a small subset of folks in the environment. So that's a real quick overview of what V4 has. I will just mention, I've talked about Teams a couple of times. One of the headline elements that's in Veeam Backup for Office 365 V5 is that we are also adding support for Microsoft Teams in V5. So that's something that as of a couple of days from now will be available to you as well. And with that, I think that I will hand things over to my colleague Rick and let him talk about how Veeam can help with ransomware.
Well, cheers, Jeff. And ransomware is quote unquote my side hustle here on the Veeam product strategy team. This is the area that I focus on kind of beyond the products. And so what I want to do is give you, first of all, some education about ransomware from a context. And, you know, if we were having this conversation in person, I'd ask each of you to raise your hand. How many of you have had some sort of ransomware incident? You would be shocked how many people raise their hand. Now, a couple of data points from dark reading that, you know, over half of organizations admit in this survey that they have had a scenario, and then a number of them become reported. And, you know, no matter what your IT role and responsibility is, you don't want to be that headline news about a ransomware situation. Now, at Veeam, we have our own data, and I actually track this very carefully. I have very good numbers indicating what types of storage people are using, how they handle it. But the one thing I don't like is at the bottom, it says average downtime for ransomware attack, 9.6 days. It's a different type of recovery. And I generally see, even in the Veeam data survey that we've done internally, I see sometimes longer restore times. So, you know, from a context standpoint, you want to be prepared to deal with this. And so that also feeds into some of the advice that I have. You know, when I first started on the ransomware journey, I thought all of them came in from phish email. I was wrong. In fact, Coveware reports that only 26% at the end of last year identify as phish. And there are other data sources, by the way, that indicate phish is the most. But we're seeing a very marked increase of remote access done wrong as the mode of entry for a lot of these ransomware attacks. Now, you can also have phenomena where some threats use multiple modes of entry and multiple behaviors. That is a different type of scenario where maybe one will come in via phish and then operate via RDP or be assisted by insiders. That's a whole different type of trouble. Okay, but three things: phish email, remote access, and vulnerability management. Doing some bad math in my head, that's 97% of the main threatscape. So what I would pivot that to say is like, hey, make sure your remote access is as secure as possible. And if you think about the burst of work from home, that's more important than ever. This data point is at the end of last year. If I look in Coveware, the source of these numbers, have put out the midpoint 2020 remark of this, and RDP or remote access exploits are going up. Makes sense, right? Two-factor authentication for anything remote. Boom. Use two-factor anywhere you can. Okay, that's a very, very good mechanism. Training around phish and updating a lot of those stuff we should be doing anyways. Those three things can address 97% of the threatscape. And when I look at ransomware resiliency at Veeam, I walk through a three-step journey where I want to spend most of my time in the first bucket educating on capabilities, both to IT administrators and end users. And I think it's very important to do both because there's different types of education needed. And when you think about the next logical step of implementing a solution like Veeam, you want to put a lot of effort there so that the least amount of effort you have to do is on the remediation. And I think that just by being here, you're taking a very important first step in learning about how threats work, what you need to protect, and what are some of the characteristics that can help you through that. Now, Jeff and I both work at Veeam, and the content here today is sponsored by Veeam. And when I think about ransomware, I get the question all the time, is Veeam, ransomware proof? And I have to answer that question in a very interesting way, because it's a lot like going through an audit, for like a compliance endeavor. I used to work at a bank. I get the question, is that PCI compliant? And I'd be like, well, it depends on how it's implemented and how it's audited. Well, a lot of that logic applies to ransomware. Is Veeam resilient against this ransomware or that ransomware? It depends on how it's implemented and how it's exploited. So there's actually some similar aspects here, but I'm going to give you some information that will be the most effective specimen for you to be resilient against ransomware. Over on the right is a set of Veeam capabilities. Now, I don't have the time here to go through all of them, but I did write a white paper on it. So if you're interested, we can point you to that. But the mindset here is to progress through a detection engine. This is one of the very first ways to identify a ransomware response. You got to know it's there. A lot of people don't know that, but Veeam actually has a detection engine. In fact, if you don't even use Veeam for your backup solution, you can go download Veeam 1 today, the community edition, which has a free edition, which has an alarm that will do ransomware detection. If we're seeing a certain pattern of CPU and write IO sustained, that might be ransomware. That's available in the free edition. So if you're not doing any ransomware detection, I encourage you to go do that right now. And then we also have, this isn't in the free edition, but we can look at change rate on backups, right? So Veeam has 2 detection mechanisms that are automated, by the way, that you can have some additional visibility. And then you can walk through like a people and process strategy. We need to adopt the 3-2-1 rule. We need to have immutable backups. And I'll get into what both of those mean, because this is a mindset change. That means you're going to prepare to be resilient against this threat. Then you can walk through specific backup capabilities, having some things. In fact, 3 of the 4 on this really are things that you might not have thought of from a backup vendor. In fact, I spoke to a healthcare organization that got out of ransomware trouble with a storage integration they didn't even know they had with Veeam, right? So, and then some APIs and sure backup capabilities can really give you things and basically weapons you didn't know you had. And then on the recovery, right? This is where it starts to really make a difference. Some of that same technology we would use just before, we can use as a recovery technique to provide very confident recovery. But if I'm telling this story to like a security professional, I have to use this type of framework, which this becomes very familiar to those types of security professionals. And it's really around identification, knowing what data we have, right? That's a very important first step. Protecting it. I love my 3-2-1 rule. I'll bring it up here in a second. Then we should look into being able to have detection engines. And the data integration API, this is one that I really like to highlight as the art of the possible. And what I mean by that is this was meant initially to look for things like PPI, credit card numbers, social security numbers, but it also can be used in a ransomware context. Example, I will take a backup of physical servers, PCs, laptops, and virtual machines. And then I'm going to crack open those backups and do a more advanced security scan with a different tool that I'm using on those devices with no exclusions. And it's the flat file system of the backed up systems. That could be a really different way to potentially determine that there's a ransomware threat in there before it starts behaving in a way that tells you that ransomware is in the mix. And then having response engines in place. Orchestration, automation become the gateway to really being able to respond succinctly to a threat like this, and knowing what the SLAs are. This is very important, I think, the SLAs, because you saw the previous point that when organizations go through ransomware, it ends up taking them a lot longer to get through it. But if we orchestrate recoveries, and Veeam can help you there, that every day we'll report that it takes 4 hours to restore everything. And the moment you add that 1.1 more petabyte or 1.1 more terabytes of data, that it tips you over the edge and it takes 4.1 hours, we'll let you know. So then the environment can be tuned to address that. Things like that can really make the difference. And then when it comes down to doing the recovery, things like secure restore, different types of recoveries can really make the difference. And Veeam specializes there. Now, there are a number of specific Veeam capabilities that can help you with that. And my goal here is to let you know that a backup solution like Veeam has a broad set of capabilities to help you with that, including that detection. So this one actually is in that free edition that I mentioned earlier. Here it's assigned for a Hyper-V virtual machine. It's an alarm within Veeam 1, possible ransomware activity. And you can go in and do that right now for free for VMware and Hyper-V environments. And you can set pretty advanced alarming options for that, meaning, okay, send me an email. That's easy. But then you can get into some remediation actions. And I don't think that's included in the free edition, but this is really significant. If this alarm is triggered, I want to shut down that virtual machine and hold on to the backups. That can be done. I want to page me, which I don't know if people still do pages, but maybe SMS me might be a little bit more logical. Text me. Don't just send it to my email. Disconnect the network. I mean, that's a pretty aggressive thing. But again, how serious do we want to take this? The capabilities are there. Now, the reality is there is a lot of people that want your good data. I hate to say it that way, but it's true. I think that your backup data is vulnerable almost as much as your production data, because the ransomware threats today, they know to look where the backups are. They're aware of different things like that. They take a look at that kind of stuff. They're becoming very intelligent. And when I look at what Veeam does from an implementation standpoint, we're playing this back and forth chess game. And so there's, over 13,000 variants by one data source of types of ransomware threats with millions of attacks just in the last calendar year. But when you also think about other things like storage failures, like when you need it, you don't know that it isn't good. There's a phenomena called bit rot or other types of, full read phenomena that doesn't go as planned, and then you have a real problem, as well as some people errors. Like I like to say accidental deletion, malicious administrator, those are different problems as well. And when you think about the knowledge of knowing where that data is kept, you really walk into needing a more advanced strategy. And so Central Florida represent 32110 is the zip code of ultimate availability. And, as we go through this at Veeam, we started with the 321 rule. Now it's the 32110 rule. Next year, it'll be a phone number. But the reality is this multiple copy strategy, 321 rule as it was born, says to have 3 different copies of data on 2 different media, one of which being offsite. Now you can throw some really advanced extra levels of resiliency into that by saying one is offline or otherwise air-gapped or immutable. And then the Veeam difference here is having 0 errors with sure backup or recovery verification, so that you know that if you go to recover it, it will function as expected. Good news here, this mindset addresses nearly any failure scenario, and it doesn't require any specific hardware or technology. Now, how do you get to that one being offline or immutable or air-gapped? These 3 storage characteristics, like lack of a better word, are what I want to basically say are the most effective specimens to being resilient against ransomware. And so I'm going to give it a word, any one of these 3, offline, immutable, or air-gapped. I want to call it ultra resilient. It's a little bit more durable than flat disk on a network, etc. But these characteristics, if a copy is offline, if a copy is immutable, if a copy is air-gapped, that is, make no mistake, the most resilient specimen to ransomware. I've talked to many organizations who have beat ransomware, and I love hearing how they do it. But I also look and talk and listen a lot more when those organizations don't beat ransomware. Every single one of the times, they do not have an offline, an immutable, or an air-gapped backup. So what is this? Well, that is something on this menu here. Now with Veeam, there are a number of ways to do this, to be offline, immutable, or air-gapped. But the reality is not all targets that Veeam supports are inherently immutable. So that's why the 32110 rule becomes really significant. Tape is a great example, but everyone has the story of tape letting them down. So I realize that. It's not the only option, but it's one of them. But if you think about worm media, very resilient. I'm going to skip these 2 after that and come back to them, but Veeam has a service provider technology called Veeam Cloud Connect, where you can have backups stored in a service provider. There is a technology there called Insider Protection where they have a out-of-band copy that they can't read, by the way, but they can restore for you. That's a really good way to be resilient because it's a copy that ransomware can't delete. It's a copy that the malicious administrator can't delete, accidental deletion can't delete, etc. For maybe smaller sites, Robo, etc., the rotating hard drive that goes offline is a good specimen. Immutable backups in the cloud, really good way to leverage S3 compatible or the public S3 for the object lock capability. And then the secure Linux repository, that's something that's coming very soon from Veeam in V11, which is in beta 2, so it's that close. But it's a Linux immutable backup repository. So here are 5, including one that's coming soon, that are really, really resilient. And then some replication technologies. Now, I want to give you a caution there because it's not fully air-gapped. It's not fully offline because, if you think about hypervisor replication, there's, it's connected. So I highly recommend different authentication fabrics and management domains, etc. But I have spoken to organizations who have beat ransomware with replication done right, DR, which we're supposed to do anyways. Now, you also can think about primary storage safe snapshots. I like to think about things like Pure Storage, Safe Mode snapshots, NetApp SnapLock snapshots, the Exagrid retention lock. Some of the storage platforms you might have may have specific ransomware resilient techniques, which if you have those, implement them 100%. But there are so many ways that you can beat ransomware with Veeam. And now I did mention object lock. This is kind of the new one that's available now. So in the public AWS S3, as well as in AWS S3 compatible storage systems with object lock support, there's this notion of compliance mode with object lock, which means you can't delete it. So if ransomware hits Veeam or if you accidentally delete stuff in the console, you can't delete it. So this is a really good specimen. Think of this write once, read many type of model in the cloud, but there's a fixed amount of time before it's permitted to be removed. So think about using that. Now, to get to making this make a little bit of sense, I want to introduce you to this thing called the cloud tier copy. So if we take a backup on premises, I want to immediately copy it to the cloud. So the thought is you can build in that 3-2-1 rule by taking a backup on premises with disk and have it immediately copied to the cloud, but made more resilient by the cloud copy being made immutable right from the start. And then lastly, this is completely transparent so that if you needed to restore, there it is. You don't have to do any type of cookbookery to make that very easy, or you don't want to make it more difficult. So how does this make sense? And I need to introduce you to something. And, if we were in person, some people would probably roll their eyes at me for saying this, but I got a bunch of buzzwords. So brace yourselves. This is a software-defined at the management level secondary storage system that's cloud ready and hardware agnostic. I guess that's implied by being software defined. But the thought here is that you can have multiple storage types on the left, direct attached storage, network attached storage, dedupe appliances, etc. That is collectively a logical construct called a performance tier. And that's where we send our backups. And then with this technology called the scale out backup repository, or SOBR, those backups with the copy mode can be immediately sent to the cloud. Couple that with the immutable aspect of AWS S3 or the AWS S3 compatible systems. That's a really resilient technique. So you take one backup and you have a copy on site, a copy in the cloud, and a copy in the cloud's immutable. There you go. And you can do that with no additional Veeam cost. It's really awesome. I'm not going to pay your cloud bill, but if you win that Amazon gift card, you have a good chance of getting started. But the magic here is that this is completely transparent to how you do your backups. There's a policy engine, and there's a space efficiency built into this. A couple of people on my team call it no dupe. It's not deduplication, but it's a technique that prevents duplication. I got to think about that. But anyways, it's a spaceless full backup technique. And then it's self-sufficient, meaning if you lost everything on premises, you can import directly from the cloud. Really, really cool stuff. And then I did mention the one coming soon, this productized implementation in XFS will provide an immutable target on Linux. So if cloud doesn't work for you, maybe not yet, you can put any Linux system up and keep backups on that with immutability, just like that. Pretty cool stuff. And actually, right above this highlighted green circle, you'll see I have used fast cloning on XFS volumes. That's another spaceless full backup technique that Veeam's implemented. So a storage efficiency on Linux with no additional cost. We have the similar thing going on with Windows ReFS as well. So, who would have thought Veeam can do all that cool stuff? But anyways, back to ransomware. It's expensive, it's real, and it's bad. One thing I want to highlight here is that, the average cost of downtime is really high. The average recovery costs a lot of money. The average recovery doesn't get it all. And most organizations deal with it somehow. So that's really kind of a problem, right? My goal at Veeam with my side hustle here on the product team is to help educate, advocate, get these product capabilities in play to help make it a lot more seamless for organizations. And some people think that, I'll just get cyber insurance. Well, don't think that that's your way out, because it's not. One of the big points that make a lot of this make sense is the failure to maintain clause. And the logic here is that there's certain responsibility that if you have the ability to implement technologies to beat ransomware, that's what you're supposed to do. And then also, sometimes now some organizations are saying that, it's illegal to pay the ransom, and all these other reasons are pointing to it's better to prepare, okay? And prepare with a backup, and prepare with detection, and prepare with remediation, and prepare with user training. That's the way through all of this. And I also encourage you to really look and seek how other organizations have beat ransomware with Veeam. Jeff, in a second, is going to highlight 2 different online events that you can replay, Veeam Live and Veeam On. Across the 2 of them, I had 4 different end users share their story of how they beat ransomware. I can't emphasize how valuable that is. But imagine walking into a screen like this, some bizarre Proton Mail email demanding a key, that I have a story of a user where that happened. And that was Dave from Canada. And he explained how everything was messed up, and he explained how he got it sorted out. It's a rough week, and he didn't have everything the right way. He made a lot of changes afterwards, and that's what he shared. That's what you need to know. But he saved his organization by having backups in Azure. The other Brett from New Orleans beat it with disaster recovery from replication. And then at Veeam Live, we had 2 users talk about one from Alaska who, believe it or not, recovered all of his data from a trial of Veeam backup and replication because he didn't like what he was using on, product X before. And all of that, all those examples, I think it's very important that you hear users tell their journey, because they talk about what they changed and what they did different. And that's a very important resource in how you can succeed in this ransom war. I like that. Anyways, the war against ransomware. So that being said, Jeff, let me bring it back to you and kind of really highlight some next steps for the attendees here on how they can engage with Veeam and put some of this information to work.
Perfect. I'd love to do that. And we have some great questions. Thank you. If you have asked a question, we haven't addressed them yet. We'll do them at the end. They look fantastic. Please rest assured that Rick and I will get to all the questions, and I will make the sort of wrap-up section here pretty quick so that we make sure we have time for that. The first is our Gartner Magic Quadrant. A lot of you are probably familiar with the industry analyst Gartner, the Gartner Group. They do pretty well-regarded ratings of lots of different categories of hardware and software. Veeam's been a leader for the last 4 years. This year, we're pretty much clearly the leader, highest for ability to execute. I'm just pointing this out so that you know that if you decide to take a chance on this, it's not a journey that you are taking alone. We have been looked at very carefully by a lot of customers, by a lot of industry analysts, and the solution that Rick and I have talked about today has been heavily vetted and thoroughly validated. I'm not going to read all the numbers on this slide because the one that I care about is that 75 on the bottom right. That is something called Veeam's Net Promoter Score. Net Promoter Score is just a statistically validated measure of whether your customers, if you're a vendor, want to stay with you or whether they want to run away from you. Veeam's Net Promoter Score of 75 is 3.5 times the industry average. It is comparable to companies like Apple that have very devoted, loyal followings that stay with them year after year. It is way higher than that of most players in the data protection space, and it's just a mark of our really fanatical focus on customer satisfaction and on making things very, very simple and very, very reliable for our customers and always supporting them. Couple of examples of that. Rick alluded to these before. We have got some really good ransomware resources, and these URLs are in the PDF copy of the deck that's in the resources section, the handout section. So take a look at those. There's a lot of information, Rick's white paper, as well as an assessment kit, and a ton of other stuff that you can take advantage of on the Veeam site. And maybe equally as valuable are the two conferences that Rick mentioned just a second ago. Now, these were live back in June and in October, but they are still available on demand. All of the sessions are available on demand. Veeam Live happened in October. You can see the URL to sign up for that and download that there. And Veeam On, back in June, was also, that was a 2-day conference, lot of fantastic resources. If you want to hear from Veeam customers, how has it actually worked for them in the field, from Veeam partners. If you want to get deep in the weeds about configuration do's and don'ts and performance do's and don'ts, this is the place to go. And you can get a lot of great content there right now. So I will go to next, and we will, I think, answer some questions now before David wraps up our talk. We've still got over 10 minutes left. So do we want to jump into questions? David, do you want to read us some questions from the audience?
Absolutely, yeah. Great presentation, Jeff and Rick. As always, Veeam puts on a great event. So thank you for that. Also, thank you to the audience out here for all the excellent questions. And let's kick it off with our first question. I see that came in. Alex is asking, what would you say is the most secure offline form of backup?
Ooh, so good question, Alex. And it's like one of those things, which child is your favorite? I would probably, this sounds crazy, Alex. I would actually say the Veeam Cloud Connect with Insider Protection. And let me explain why. That's a copy of your backup data with a different administrative boundary. And the magic is those service providers have an infrastructure as a service target that they can help you restore to. That's the difference maker. Tape is good, probably a next best, especially worm media. Then I would probably lean on the cloud immutability, and then I would lean on potentially rotating hard drives. But I actually think Veeam Cloud Connect is out there. And then from our technology set, that's the most innovated and iterated one out there.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, good answer. The next question, this comes from Jeremy. He's asking, is there a Veeam solution that we can purchase that will only protect our Office 365 data? He says we don't have any virtual machines that we're looking to protect, mainly just looking to protect Office 365.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question, Jeremy. That is completely the case. The Veeam backup product for virtual machines and physical machines is licensed differently than the Veeam backup for Office 365. We try to make the Veeam backup for Office 365 licensing intuitive. You license it exactly the same as you license that service, that is by mailbox. And if you license a user's mailbox, that protects his email data, it protects his OneDrive data and SharePoint data, and soon to be, as of Thursday of this week, Teams data. So it is completely doable to just protect the O365, the Microsoft 365 data of your users or your agency or enterprise without having to license stuff you're not going to use around protecting physical servers or VMs.
Very nice, very nice. And then here's another question from Alex. He's asking how to access the free Veeam edition.
Yeah, just go to veeam.com and then there's a free products situation. We might call it Community Edition. And you can get a free Veeam availability suite or Veeam backup and replication community edition, but you also can go over to the AWS marketplaces and get the community edition for backing up AWS and Azure VMs over in the Azure Marketplace, and the Office 365 solution. Guess what? It has a free edition too. They're all limited to 10. So 10 users in Office 365, 10 VMs on premises, or 10 physical servers, or 10 Azure VMs, etc. It all starts at veeam.com.
Very nice. Yeah, great free way to try out Veeam for yourself. See it in action, do a proof of concept, put it in a lab environment and see the real power of Veeam. So another question here, they're asking on average, can you estimate what percentage of your clients have been affected by ransomware?
Yeah, Alex. So we do have data on that. We have voluntary responses where organizations have said basically, yeah, I've had to deal with ransomware. And I can tell you also that our tech support team helps customers out of that every single day. We've even restructured our support team. I would say that we're not far off that industry average that comes, I'd say about half of the organizations out there have had it, I have some, I'm not allowed to say the kind of the remediation rate, but I spoke to some industry analysts and they said that's very good. Because I've spent the last 3 years telling people the 3-2-1 rule and that more specific point of when organizations don't have a copy that's ultra resilient, they are not in a good spot. And I have indications year over year that people are putting more copies on some of those ultra resilient medias. 3-2-1 rule, baby. That's going to be my first tattoo, David.
Okay, I look forward to that. Look forward to seeing that. Another question here, Vasanta, I think is how you pronounce their name, is asking, can the threats be stopped at the router level before hitting the end user? And also, if a service provider detects a threat, can it stop the threat before it goes into the corporate office?
Yeah, good question, Mr. V. I would say there's a lot of detection engines, and I'll also be 100% transparent. Veeam is not all things detection to ransomware, period. Where we can, we will. So whether it's change rate in the backup data, whether it's, an observed CPU and disk IO phenomena, that's an area we can help, but we don't really get on the network like that. I would recommend, look at what you have. Do they have ransomware detection, other off-the-shelf tools, and endpoint detection, right? I give a shout out to the PC security channel over on YouTube. Leo does a really good job of giving you some really good info on that. If you haven't gone there, go there.
Nice. All right. Another question. Are there any cases of Exchange Online being hit with ransomware?
I'm not aware of. We have seen some Office 365 OneDrive for Business scenarios where that's made sense. But I'll also say you almost have to keep accidental deletion and malicious administrator as an equal threat, meaning, the day someone gets really good with PowerShell is the day they accidentally delete everything. So maybe they're not good at PowerShell. So, equate the threats, right? So yeah, there's not been news, but you don't want to be the news.
Absolutely. This is not good news. You don't want to be in that type of news. Another question, are there any documented cases of customers actually losing data in Office 365?
To ransomware, not that I'm aware of. To accidental deletion, yes.
Yeah, we've done it sort of as I mentioned in Veeam On, we had one of our team members, Rick's and my team members, do it as sort of a proof of concept. It absolutely can be done, but fortunately we haven't heard of that in the wild yet.
Okay, good to know. And then what happens to Office 365 backups if folks stop using Veeam?
Well, the backups sit there. The community edition, meaning if you stop using Veeam, let's just suppose you're not using a paid edition, but at Veeam we have community editions, which we have this portability, self-describing data principle that you can restore. You don't lose your right to restore. So even the free edition can crack open the backups and restore it.
Nice. That's cool. I bet a lot of folks don't know about that. Let's see, another question, I like this one. How much time and manual effort does it take you to find the items to restore if you don't know their exact location? Can you search through the backup catalog, or how does that work?
Oh, in Veeam Town, there's a lot of ways to restore. And over here on my wall, at least the previous version, there's like 57 ways to recover. So, that's where I think having good training on the backup tool, right, that pays off in that situation, because there are catalogs and indexes that, especially files, if you need a file back, you have your own personal Google across the files, right? You can just find a file. You don't need to know what server or VM it was on, et cetera. So, and that's in the Veeam Enterprise Manager, for example. So I encourage people to just know what the tools can do, train up.
Absolutely. Lots of good questions coming in. Before we go, I want to remind everyone about the great resources that are there on the screen and the slides window, as well as the handouts. So many good handouts in there. You want to download those before we wrap up the event. Just a few minutes left. Next question comes from Chris. He's asking if you have any comments or recommendations on ransomware insurance.
Sure. So Chris, we heard a little bit about that earlier from Rick, but I'll just expand on it briefly. There's two things that folks need to think about with ransomware insurance. The first is exactly what Rick mentioned, this clause called a failure to maintain. And failure to maintain is a very, very common line in insurance policies. If I have a fireworks factory and I let my employees smoke in the factory and shoot off fireworks inside the factory, and my factory burns down one day, my insurance company, when I go to get money back from them, is going to say, you failed to maintain a safe environment. Well, your cyber insurance company can turn around and say exactly the same thing. And there have been very well publicized court cases where they've done exactly that. The most brutal one, the cyber insurance company's lawyers turned around to the claimant and said, we don't cover stupid, because the claimant hadn't done a good job of making their environment secure. And they ended up not having to pay a penny because they showed that the insured hadn't done a good job of making their environment secure, and so it wasn't their fault that the insured had been careless. So that's something that you have to think about. You may need immutable storage and a good ransomware solution in place if you want to recover from cyber insurance. We're also increasingly hearing from customers that when they go to get a cyber insurance policy, just like when I go to get life insurance, they ask me if I smoke and skydive to figure out how much to charge me. We have folks that are being asked by their insurance provider, okay, tell us about your disaster recovery solution. Tell us about how you guard against ransomware. And it may be that you, your agency, your school, your town, whatever, isn't able to get insurance at a rate that you want to pay without a solution like this in place. So does it help? Absolutely. But it certainly doesn't erase the need to have a good ransomware story that you're running in shop.
Very well said. Very well said. Another question here is from Christine. She's asking, what are the challenges with the Corona crisis in relation to backups?
Ooh, two things I'll add in addition to what we already said. One is remote access. You remember that I highlighted, at least from Coveware, it's the most popular mode of entry. But if you look back to March and April, if remote access wasn't standard issue for some people, what did we have to do? We had to hurry. And if you go back to a solution, do you need it right or do you need it right now? We needed it right now, and I worry that there were corners cut. So that's one thing I worry about. And then Jeff highlighted earlier some of the threats about data capture on unknown and potentially unsecured network, and things like BYOD that isn't permitted, right? I'll just use my kid's laptop, the gaming one, because it's a lot faster than the one that IT issued, right? So data capture and the networks we're using and remote access, those are some current condition phenomena that kind of divert my attention.
Excellent. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have in today's webinar, but just fantastic knowledge sharing here. Jeff and Rick, thank you so much for your presentation.
Cheers.
Our pleasure. Thank you, David. Thanks, everyone.
And of course, thank you to Veeam for supporting today's event. Don't forget to check out the Ransomware Assessment Kit, the Ransomware Education site, the Veeam Content Library, and all the resources that are there available for download in the Handouts tab before you go. And finally, I want to announce the winner of today's Amazon gift card. This is for, again, an Amazon $500 gift card going to David Kaiser from Pennsylvania. Congratulations, David Kaiser from Pennsylvania will reach out to you to deliver your gift card. Thank you to everyone out there in the audience for joining us on the webinar today. I hope you learned a lot. and had a good time. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.